You blacks deserve this. Racist manager tortures black waitress daily. What happens next will shock you. What if one waitress had enough of the daily torment and decided to stand up against her racist boss? Tasha Williams was no stranger to struggle. At 29, she carried the weight of the world on her shoulders, though you'd never know it from the way she moved through the Sunrise Diner. Her smile was her armor, a practiced curve of her lips that hid the exhaustion in her bones and the ache in her heart. She was a single mother, a waitress, and a survivor in a town that didn't always welcome her. The Sunrise Diner sat on the edge of Willow Creek, a small, predominantly white town where time seemed to move slower, but prejudice lingered like a stubborn stain. The diner itself was a relic of the past: red vinyl booths, checkered floors, and a jukebox that hadn't worked in years. It was the kind of place where locals gathered for coffee and gossip, and where Tasha had worked for the past 6 years, ever since Mia, her daughter, was 2. Mia was Tasha's reason for everything. At 8 years old, she was a whirlwind of energy and dreams, with a sharp mind and a heart too big for her small frame. She'd sit at the diner's counter after school, her nose buried in a library book about famous lawyers, her eyes sparkling as she declared, "Mama, I'm gonna be like Thurgood Marshall one day. I'm gonna fight for what's right." Tasha would nod, her chest swelling with pride, but also with a quiet fear. She wanted Mia to have a better life, but in Willow Creek, that felt like chasing a mirage. Tasha's days were a blur of refilling coffee mugs, balancing trays, and dodging the sharp edges of Thomas Walker's temper. Thomas, the diner's owner, was a man who wore his privilege like a badge. At 45, he was broad-shouldered and loud, with a voice that carried over the clatter of dishes. He'd inherited the diner from his father, who'd inherited it from his father, and he ran it with the same outdated mindset that had been passed down through generations. To Thomas, Tasha wasn't a person, she was a target. It started small. A snide comment about her hair. A jab about her work ethic when she was the first to arrive and the last to leave. But over time, the microaggressions grew bolder. He'd seat the worst customers at her tables, knowing they'd stiff her on tips. He'd forget to schedule her for the busier shifts, cutting her earnings. And worst of all, he'd humiliate her in front of customers, his words dripping with condescension. "Tasha, don't mess this up," he'd say loudly, as if she were incompetent. The customers would laugh nervously, and Tasha would force a smile, her stomach twisting. She stayed because she had to. The diner was one of the few places in town hiring, and with Mia's school supplies, doctor's visits, and their small apartment's rent, every dollar counted. Tasha had learned to bury her anger, to keep her head down, to survive. But each day chipped away at her spirit, and she wondered how much longer she could hold on. It was a Wednesday afternoon, the kind of day where the diner was packed with regulars, truckers, retirees, and a few out-of-towners passing through. Tasha moved through the chaos with her usual grace, balancing plates of burgers and fries while dodging sticky-fingered kids. Mia sat at the counter, her homework spread out, occasionally glancing up to flash her mother a grin. Thomas was in a mood. Tasha could tell from the way he barked orders at the cooks, his face redder than usual. She stayed out of his way, but she could feel his eyes on her, waiting for a mistake. It came during the lunch rush, when a table of 4 demanded extra ketchup. Tasha, juggling 3 other tables, grabbed a bottle and set it down with a polite smile. The customer, a middle-aged man with a permanent scowl, muttered something under his breath. Tasha didn't catch it, but Thomas did. "See, this is why you can't trust her kind to get it right," Thomas said loudly, striding over to the table. The words hit Tasha like a slap. Her kind. The diner went quiet, forks pausing mid-air, eyes darting between Thomas and Tasha. Mia's pencil stopped moving, her small hands clenching into fists. Tasha's face burned, but she kept her composure, her voice steady. "Anything else you need, sir?" she asked the customer, ignoring Thomas. The man smirked, shaking his head. Tasha turned to walk away, but Thomas wasn't done. "You blacks deserve this kind of work," he said, his voice carrying across the diner. "Always messing things up." The words landed like a bomb. Tasha froze, her tray trembling in her hands. The diner was silent now, every eye on her. She could feel Mia's gaze, her daughter's wide eyes filled with confusion and hurt. Tasha wanted to scream, to throw the tray at Thomas, to demand respect. But instead, she set the tray down, her movements mechanical, and walked to the back, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst. In the cramped break room, Tasha pressed her hands against the wall, trying to steady her breathing. She'd heard worse from Thomas over the years, but this was different. This wasn't a whisper or a subtle jab, it was blatant, public, and meant to break her. And in front of Mia. That was what hurt the most. She thought of her daughter, of the dreams she carried, of the world Tasha wanted for her. She thought of all the time she'd stayed silent, swallowing her pride to keep this job. And she realized something. Silence wasn't strength anymore. It was surrender. Tasha didn't expect what happened next. As she emerged from the break room, wiping her eyes, she noticed a group of regulars huddled at the counter. There was Martha, a retired schoolteacher who always tipped generously, Javier, a mechanic who came in every morning for coffee, and Sarah, a nurse who'd seen Tasha at her lowest but never cried. They were whispering, their faces tight with anger. "Tasha," Martha said softly, waving her over. "We heard what he said. That's not right." Tasha hesitated, her instinct to brush it off kicking in. But Javier spoke up, his voice low but firm. "We've seen how he treats you. It's been going on too long. You don't deserve this." Sarah nodded, her eyes fierce. "We're with you, Tasha. Whatever you need." Their words were a lifeline, pulling Tasha from the edge of despair. She'd always thought of the regulars as just customers, faces she smiled at to earn a tip. But now, she saw something else. People who'd watched, who'd cared, who'd been waiting for a chance to help. That evening, as Tasha and Mia walked home, Mia's small hand slipped into hers. "Mama, why did Mr. Walker say that?" she asked, her voice small. Tasha knelt down, looking into her daughter's eyes. "Because some people are scared of what's different, baby. But that doesn't make them right. And it doesn't mean we have to stay quiet." Mia nodded, her jaw set. "You're gonna fight, aren't you?" Tasha smiled, a real smile this time. "Yeah, baby. I'm gonna fight." The next morning, Tasha walked into the diner with a fire in her chest. She'd spent the night researching, making calls, and reaching out to a local lawyer who'd agreed to meet with her pro bono. She wasn't just going to confront Thomas, she was going to hold him accountable. The diner was quieter than usual, the air tense. Thomas was behind the counter, barking orders as always. Tasha waited until the breakfast rush slowed, then approached him, her voice steady. "Thomas, we need to talk." He smirked, wiping his hands on a rag. "What's this? You got a problem, Tasha?" "Yes," she said, her voice clear. "Your behavior is unacceptable. The way you've treated me, the things you've said, it's wrong, and it stops now." The few customers in the diner turned to watch. Thomas's face reddened, his smirk fading. "You don't get to tell me how to run my business," he snapped. "You're lucky to have this job." "No," Tasha said, stepping closer. "You're lucky I haven't taken you to court yet. But that's about to change." The words hung in the air, heavy with promise. Thomas laughed, but it was forced, his eyes darting to the customers watching. "You think you can threaten me? Get back to work." "I'm not your servant," Tasha said, her voice rising. "And I'm not alone anymore." Martha stood up from her booth. "You heard her, Thomas," Martha said, her voice shaking but firm. "We're done watching you bully her. You're going to answer for this." Javier and Sarah joined her, their presence a wall of support. Thomas's bravado faltered, his eyes narrowing. "You're all crazy," he muttered, but he backed away, retreating to his office. Tasha felt a surge of power, but she knew this was only the beginning. Confronting Thomas was one thing, taking him down would be another. With the lawyer's help, Tasha filed a discrimination lawsuit against Thomas. The process was grueling, gathering evidence, documenting years of mistreatment, and facing Thomas's attempts to intimidate her. He spread rumors around town, painting Tasha as a troublemaker, but the regulars stood by her, sharing their own stories of Thomas's behavior. The case gained traction when a local journalist, intrigued by the buzz, interviewed Tasha. Her story spread, sparking outrage in Willow Creek and beyond. People who'd never set foot in the diner began showing up, holding signs outside, "Justice for Tasha." Mia, ever her mother's cheerleader, made her own sign, proudly displaying it at a rally. But the fight wasn't easy. Tasha faced backlash, anonymous threats, cold stares from some townsfolk, and moments of doubt. One night, as she tucked Mia into bed, she broke down, tears streaming down her face. "Mama, are you okay?" Mia asked, her small hand on Tasha's cheek. "I'm scared, baby," Tasha admitted. "What if this doesn't work?" Mia sat up, her eyes fierce. "You're doing what's right. Like Thurgood Marshall. You can't stop now." Tasha hugged her daughter tightly, drawing strength from her words. Mia was right, she couldn't stop. Not for herself, not for Mia, not for every worker who'd been silenced by people like Thomas. The courtroom was packed, the air thick with anticipation. Tasha sat at the plaintiff's table, her hands clasped tightly. Across from her, Thomas sat with his lawyer, his face a mask of defiance. The evidence was overwhelming. Testimonies from customers, former employees, even a cook who'd quit because of Thomas's behavior. Tasha's own testimony was raw, her voice breaking as she recounted years of humiliation. When it was Thomas's turn to speak, he tried to deflect, claiming Tasha was exaggerating for attention. But the judge wasn't swayed. The verdict came swiftly. Thomas was found liable for workplace discrimination and harassment. He was ordered to pay Tasha a substantial settlement, and the diner was placed under scrutiny, effectively forcing its closure. As the gavel fell, Tasha felt a weight lift from her shoulders. She looked at Mia, sitting in the front row, her face beaming with pride. The regulars were there too, clapping and cheering. For the first time in years, Tasha felt seen, not as a waitress or a victim, but as a woman who'd fought and won. The victory was sweet, but it was what came next that changed everything. A week after the trial, Tasha received a call from a community organization in a neighboring city. They'd heard about her case and wanted her to join their team as a community advocate, working to improve workplace conditions for marginalized groups. The offer came with a salary that would let her and Mia move to a better apartment, and it included support for Mia's education. Tasha was stunned. She'd never imagined her fight would lead to this, a chance to not just survive, but to thrive, to make a difference for others. She accepted the offer, her heart full. The diner's closure sent ripples through Willow Creek. Thomas left town, his reputation in tatters. The space was bought by a young couple who reopened it as a community hub, with a focus on inclusivity. Tasha's story inspired others to speak out, and the town began to change. Conversations about race and equality, once taboo, became common. People who'd stayed silent began to listen, to learn, to grow. A year later, Tasha stood at the front of a community center, speaking to a room full of workers about their rights. Mia sat in the audience, her eyes shining with pride. Tasha had found her purpose, not just as a mother, but as a voice for those who'd been silenced. The scars of her time at the diner remained, but they were proof of her strength, not her pain. As she finished her speech, the room erupted in applause. Mia ran to her, throwing her arms around her mother. "You did it, Mama," she whispered. Tasha smiled, holding her daughter close. "We did it, baby." The sun set over Willow Creek, casting a warm glow over the town. It wasn't perfect, but it was changing, one voice at a time. And Tasha Williams, once a waitress who'd endured in silence, had become a beacon of hope, proving that courage could transform not just a life, but a community.